thank you for joining us for this session of Out of Band. Today, we are starting a new series on a day in the life of several security professionals. We would like to know what exactly happens in their professional life, what challenges do they go through, what is their day like? And that was the inspiration as to why we brought our guest here today. Jennifer, would you like to introduce our guest, Allan?
Sure. So today we have Allan van Leeuwen with us. He is a very experienced SOC employee. He has multiple roles within the SOC Security Operations Center, has been the analyst, has been the SOC lead, has been responsible for many transformations and innovative capabilities within his Security Operations Center. But I think maybe he can explain a little bit better himself. So Allan, could you maybe introduce yourself a little bit and your background?
Sure, Jennifer, thanks. First of all, thanks for inviting me. Exciting to be here in this new podcast. It's fairly new as far as I could tell anyway.
Yeah.
It's very nice, appreciate it. I'm Allan van Leeuwen, Dutch. I have worked at several different security operations centers in different sectors, in the finance industry, in the energy sector, the oil and gas industry, and currently working for a managed security provider as the interim SOC manager, where I started as the team lead when it was small, and it has now grown to a beautiful part of the business, actually the core business of our company at the moment.
Very cool.
What more can I tell you? Long history in security. Yeah, I made a switch from like general IT to security around 2002, 2003. At the time of like the blaster worm and those fun things at the time.
Yeah. So that is actually cool because, sorry, Faith, please do.
Yeah, and what is your current role right now?
It's a little bit vague because it's an interim position. So I started as the team lead of the entire department when there was just 5 people working there a couple of years ago. And we've now grown to where the size of the department is about 30 people. So we've separated them into separate teams. There's a development team developing all the security use cases, the engineers keeping all the systems alive and healthy. We have an offensive team performing all the red teaming and pen testing. And of course, operations, the people who are looking at the alerts and doing the analysis. And I was responsible for the development team and offensive. But because of a shift in personnel, I'm now the interim SOC manager, trying to hold that position for a while until we get a real SOC manager. I'm actually more of a team lead, I think, but we can do it. I'm getting some support from other people within the company, and it's working out okay. So we're doing fine.
Nice. Anne, do you want to share why exactly we decided to start with SOC? Because you're the one who triggered this.
Yeah. I'm the one who triggered this?
No, Anne Leslie.
Oh, Anne. Oh, I thought you said Allan. Okay.
Oh, well, no, it's going to be coming back to you, right?
Oh, yes.
Right. So the 3 of us we were chatting, right? So we were doing sort of, what topics are we going to cover next? And we were talking about things like getting into security. And one of the things that kind of came up in the conversation was, I don't know, the SOC is like the nerve center, right? There's so much happening in it. It's full of information, it's full of technology, and generally full of, okay, there's never universally great people, but there are a lot of people who are in SOC roles who have a real kind of inner motivation and they really care about security. And yet, at least from kind of the perspective that I've seen, we don't take great care of the people in the SOC. We don't, well, okay, so if I'm getting this wrong, right, this is the perspective that I have, is that particularly L1 roles, and maybe a little bit of L2, but particularly the L1, it's like they're dispensable. You know, as soon as we can replace them with technology, we're going to replace them with technology. They're like headcount that we would love to eliminate, and they're not really adding value. And I just kind of, you know, so with my relatively new to security compared to other people, my perspective on this was kind of going, it kind of strikes me like the L1 role is sort of the customer service role that you might have in another domain. And what I mean by that is customer service roles are often, it's a dispensable expense. You know, we can do without it. And yet it's the entry point. And it's kind of I don't believe that doorbell. Oh my God. Hang on. Sorry. I have to let her in. It's my daughter. I'll be right back.
Hold that door.
Well, that is the risk of having to work from home. That's not an issue.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm back. Incident response. What I was saying was the thing about the L1, right? It's that first starting point. And where I've been thinking about this in terms of like customer support. If you have a customer contacting a business about something that's going wrong, that's the entry point. It's this interface. And if we get that touch point wrong, I'm just kind of feeling like the whole thing goes wrong. And I'd love your perspective on that, because I'm just kind of going, are we getting it totally wrong in the sense of saying L1 doesn't matter? I kind of feel like it totally does matter, because if it goes wrong there, does the whole thing not go wrong?
So I guess before we even answer that question, we'd like to know, Allan, how is it in the SOC? You've had our perspective or Anne's perspective. How is it exactly in the SOC? Is it how we imagine it, or is it different?
First of all, it's different in every SOC. So some SOCs just have a single tier, just one line of defense. They do all the work. They pick up the alert from the start and they work it out to the end. And of course, many companies have an internal SOC. They run their own SOC. So there's not really any customer interface. They're mainly interfacing with the system administrators. So you're looking at a different skill set then. Currently working for a managed security provider. There we do interface with the customer. So there it is required when you're hiring these people that you make sure that they're able to pick up the phone and call a customer, because not everyone is able to. You may have some people who are very great technically, but they're very introverted and maybe scared to pick up the phone. Some of this you can work on a little bit. You can improve their skill set in that area. Some are total naturals, you know. It's good to have a mix, and probably the people who are really very technical, if you have multiple tiers, they're going to be moving up the tiers fairly quickly. And Anne was calling it the entry point. I think it's also the entry point for many people for their career, starting on tier 1. Before I went into security myself, I worked many years on the help desk. I'm very happy to see for my employees that they're progressing much faster than I did. Not having to do tier 1 work for many years, but I enjoyed it. I liked talking to people on the phone and solving their problems. So just like on a help desk, it's often the first step in somebody's career, in somebody's IT career. In security, it can very often be a tier 1 position on the SOC. You start as an analyst, do the basic work, and the more technical inclined people will progress through the tiers. Other ones may decide they want to be a consultant or fill some other security related position in the company. Yeah, so I think the main difference is whether you're a managed security provider and doing the work for a customer, or you have an internal SOC. There's a big difference there. Internal SOCs are smaller, have fewer tiers.
And I think they're also the atmosphere there is a little bit more positive, because you're basically talking to your colleagues, right?
Yeah.
As opposed to if it's a customer.
In that regard, I would say it kind of depends also what the position of the SOC internally is. I mean, it can be, for example, that the entire organization views it as a compliance piece. which basically means that if you actually have to perform security-related activities, getting the necessity across might become a bit more difficult than having your security operations center being like the entire center of the organization and really having good relationships with the rest of the organization.
Yeah.
So that also comes into play, I guess, or at least that's my opinion.
I totally agree. To see compliance just run.
Yeah, I mean, I've had client situations or situations where I was working myself within the security operations center where you knew that an incident was real and you knew what could be done to solve it, and still the business would say, we don't see the necessity for that, we don't see the priority for that. And
Yeah.
then you as a SOC employee, or you as a SOC as a whole, have a very difficult position, because you basically don't get taken seriously in that regard.
Yeah, I think the danger in that is not really because it's compliance versus security. It's more of that there's some people who will just do compliance. Compliance is good, right? But if you're just doing compliance and
Tick in a box.
not really, yeah, exactly, just ticking a box, then it makes security analysts bored, I think, at some point. So Allan, so what exactly is a day in the life of an analyst like? I know that we have red teamers and blue teamers, but what's a normal day like?
Also, that's a little bit different per company, but because the work package is different per company. So in some organizations, vulnerability management is part of the package, for instance, performing all the scans and doing the reporting and everything. In other places, that's a separate team performing that, for instance, or a separate service they get from another company. But generally, they'll be looking at a console where alerts are being generated by the SIEM, preferably with a criticality rating in there, giving them some indication which alert to pick up first. If you have multiple tiers, there will first be some triage. Who am I assigning this ticket to? Is it very simple? Is it a few automated steps? Can tier one complete the whole process maybe? Or they will send it on to their more technically inclined colleagues. And these alerts can range, they can vary greatly, the content. Not all companies have an EDR solution, so endpoint detection and response, and they'll have a much stronger focus on trying to detect things on the wire, so on the network. In other companies, it's the opposite. They will only have an EDR solution and just focus on the endpoint. Which is the best? It's hard to say. I think you need a mix of both, but we do see a definite shift because of mainly because of encryption. That is more important to see what's happening on the endpoint, because the network is going dark, as we say.
Yep.
It's harder to see the contents of the packets. It's harder to perform the analysis there. So there's a shift going towards endpoint detection. Then there's also a shift towards more anomaly detection. So the classic way of working with a SIEM is you define very hard-coded rules. If this many field logons are performed within this time frame, generate an alert. If somebody visits a website which is listed in the threat intelligence feeds, generate an alert. Of course, attackers are constantly changing their tactics. So if you're only building detection for all the things that we know about, you're going to miss the new attacks. So the movement that the market is making is towards anomaly detection. Set up a sensor that creates a baseline of the current behavior of the network, and alerts will be triggered when anomalies are detected. This is also not a 100% working solution, because depending on how the company works and how the system administrators work mainly, it can generate a lot of false positives. Many of the attacker tools are the same tools that the administrators are using themselves. Things like PSXSec or WMI execution, this can happen during normal day-to-day operation. If you have an administrator who doesn't have a fixed workspace, doesn't have a fixed workstation, and is sitting in a different spot every day, you're going to have anomalies every day. So yeah, both these ways of working require a lot of tuning. So that's also something that the analyst has to deal with. They have to figure out, okay, this is the third time today I'm looking at the same alert. I'm very bored with this alert. I already know what the outcome is. I'm going to go through it again. Maybe you can whitelist an IP address, or maybe you can change a filter in the use case somewhere. In our setup at this moment, we're trying to give the analyst some responsibility in this. Adding some entries into a whitelist, for instance, is simple enough. Anybody can do it. Maybe check with your colleague, do a little peer review of what you're actually doing. But you don't need to go to the development team to have the use case modified if you're only adding something to the whitelist. So they get some extra responsibility there. If it's really a larger modification, like a new type of firewall needs to be added to the use case and to also work on Palo Alto firewalls or different type of firewall, then it goes to the development team and they will develop new filters to add that firewall to the current use case. What else can I tell you about the day of an analyst?
I guess for me,
let's not forget, it can also be the night of an analyst.
Very much true. I mean, you have security operation centers that have an 8 to 5 working model. So they basically only offer services from Monday to Friday, or depending in which world area you are, that's the working week. Or you have SOCs that provide 24/7 operations.
I've rarely seen those there. I know of some, but even Aramco, where I used to work, the big oil company, Saudi oil company, they started with a 24/7 SOC, and eventually they figured out, so very little happens during the night. Maybe we can just have the most critical alerts sent to an analyst's phone in the night, and then he can log in and check it out.
Yeah. Or they moved to the follow the sun model, right? So you have people in APAC, EMEA, and NAM covering.
Yeah, that also is a good way of doing it. You're going to have to figure out some way of doing a handover, and it's all areas need to use the same set of use cases, which is also not always the case. So it's very difficult if you're an analyst and you have to look at the alerts at night from another location where it's day, and they have a completely different set of use cases that you are not experienced with. Then you need to have very good documentation and processes.
Yeah. And in certain cases, you also have, for example, to think about regulations that you have in certain world areas. I mean, data transfer is not everywhere possible to every region, for example. Yeah. So that is also something that you need to consider if you're working with a follow the sun model.
Yeah, I guess that's mainly a problem if you're a service provider. If you're monitoring your own network,
very true.
Offices all over the world, it doesn't apply.
Sometimes it does in certain world areas, specifically in Asia, for example.
Right.
I think GDPR has made SOC a little challenging in EMEA because, you know, normally you would probably have people in the US or in APAC being able to cover the load. But now with GDPR, or some people misunderstand it, and now you have a lot of alerts just being handled by EMEA people.
That's one of the big issues, is when you were talking about compliance, right? And when lawyers get involved in questions of liability, it's often easier just to restrict, because there's this perception of we're lowering our risk by restricting, at least we're not going to get into trouble because of that. But it's not always necessary. So we end up with very restrictive models that, if we manage to have a better kind of dialogue between the security domain experts who actually know what the thing is and the lawyers who understand the parameters of what the law, the regulation provides for, but it's actually brokering that conversation that's extremely difficult.
Yeah. And Allan, so I think I mentioned that I worked in the technical assistance center, and I spent 3.5 years there. So I picture the TAC as something that as similar to a SOC, in the case that I would come in and my day was you know, I would basically have a shift, right? The 8 hours. And the first 4 hours, for example, I would always just get cases. I was, you know, sitting there like, okay, so there's a new call, there's a new alert. It's case after case after case. And then in the afternoon, for example, I would work on my backlog. And there was really never enough time. You just had cases and cases coming in. And even though everyone is exhausted, everyone is tired, everyone is furious and complaining, nothing was being done. So over to what Anne was asking, do you take care of the SOC analysts? Or
yeah, we were talking about taking care of your employees. That's true.
yeah.
I
What
think I
has
was
your
trying to lead to
experience
that a little
been
bit
like?
when I was saying it's the tier 1 should be an entry position for your career. And I myself worked many years at a help desk before I could move up to a higher position. The market is very different now. You can move up much faster, luckily for them. And I think it's very important to be able to tell your employees what their path is going to be, what their options are, what their future is going to look like. As long as there's a road ahead of them and they know where they're heading, I don't think anybody minds having to do a year or 2 of analyst work. And for most people, I think they will learn enough during that time that it doesn't get boring very quickly. If it does get boring very quickly, you obviously need more automation. That's the key. If I hear that you have a backlog and you can't get through it and there's not enough people and it's boring, and yeah, that sounds like you have a need for more automation.
Because speaking about that, I mean, we all work for an MSSP, and we see all kinds of developments within the SOC, both on people and processes side, but also on the technology side, among which is, for example, automation or the integration of artificial intelligence. What is your view on that, actually?
They still have to convince me that investment into a SOAR platform will actually materialize into a lower cost.
Okay.
The applications are very expensive, and what you buy is an empty box, just like with your SIEM solution. You have to develop all the playbooks yourself, all the automation, all the integrations. Eventually, you'll start saving time. So I guess in the long run, eventually you save time, but it's not just a plug and play solution and now everything's automated and we have more time. It doesn't work like that. First, you have to invest more time in order to save more time.
Yeah.
Is maybe then positioning SOAR as the reason for SOAR is cost reduction is the wrong way of looking at it, right? So if you're looking at it in terms of what it can do to give you better security outcomes, lowering your risk because you're responding quicker, but not looking at it to say we need to get the cost of security down.
Optimization, perhaps.
Point. Yeah, it's a very good point. Maybe I have been looking at it in the wrong way. I guess one thing that I do see that it will bring, and it's already showing some result in that area, is it will alleviate analyst fatigue.
Yeah.
Because it takes away the boring parts of the work, basically.
Yeah.
That's why I'm saying if you find the work too boring, you need more automation.
Yeah.
But in my opinion, many of these things can be automated with a little Python script instead of a $100,000 platform.
But that's exactly what a SOAR is, right? It's just a combination of Python scripts in one.
Somebody else's Python script.
Little front end, yeah.
Patented, nice, pretty design.
Yes.
Actually, that's a really interesting point, right? Which is something that I've noticed, particularly around since kind of lockdown and COVID, is that some smart security teams, and particularly where there's a CISO in place that's interested in kind of thinking outside the box, right? They've got a budget, which is what it is, but they've got new challenges. And I've seen some security teams actually really kind of coming together and coming up with smart ideas about how could we do more with what we've got. And it's what seems to be really changing the quality of that conversation is how much the team likes working with each other, and they actually like each other. No, like you're laughing, but it's
no, I recognize it.
not insignificant, right? And that the team actually feels like a team, and they actually feel that there is a point to discussing with other. That doesn't mean they always agree, right? It's not like Care Bear Land, but it just means that there's a real difference between groups of individuals who are bound by nothing more than the fact that they work for the same company, and groups of individuals who enjoy each other's company and like coming up with new ways and better ways of doing stuff. And we're actually, Faith asked me to introduce why we came up with this topic. It's fundamentally that in security, we talk so much about technology, and it's important. I'm not saying it's not. So is process. We don't really talk about the people that much.
We
and
forget.
Fundamentally hold the thing together. I mean, if the lights go off and the internet goes down, what are you left with? You're left with people. And that's not a bad thing, but it's the difference between people who care, who will find a way, and people who kind of go, it's just a job kind of thing.
I'm off the clock.
Yeah, and that's sort of the real motivation for, you know, having conversations with people like you, which is, well, behind the SOAR platform and behind the SIM and behind the, you know, the compliance checklists of ISO 27K, you've got men and women, and just we don't seem to give that really critical part of security enough airtime.
Yeah, I totally agree with you on. During my time in Technical Assistance Center, it's the team that kept me going, because you're in a very stressful environment. Allan, I think you agree with that, right? You're in a very stressful environment where everything is very critical. You have to, you have to make sure that everything is sorted out in ASAP, and every day is a stressful day. But being around people, colleagues that, make work fun was most critical for me. I don't think I would have endured that long in an environment that was toxic. Yeah.
I hear the birds outside. Hold on.
But maybe that's actually that question for you, right? So it is a high pressure environment. Like, what are the things?
Yeah.
What are the things that you've got the work that needs to be done, but there's a difference between an environment where you can deal with the pressure and then an environment where the pressure gets oppressive. So what are the things that you sort of point to in things that you've seen done well or not done quite so well, things that work, things that help to make the work not just kind of the routine that you have to get to, but there's a feeling of satisfaction of a job well done, I guess.
Yeah. There's a lot of things you can do. It has become a lot harder during the COVID situation because we don't see each other face to face. It's much easier to spot how somebody's feeling when they come in the morning, when you see them walk into the door. Then you have a 15-minute stand-up call in the morning, and there's a slight delay between the image and the audio, and you can't pick up any cues. It's so different. It's much more difficult. I think appreciation is very important. So make sure your people feel appreciated. Put them in the spotlight when they have an achievement. Make sure everybody hears about it. You can either do this immediately when it happens, or you save them all up and do it in a monthly meeting or something. But make sure that the achievements get mentioned and people feel appreciated. That's very important. And that's also they also need to feel appreciated in a monetary sense. So make sure they have a decent salary, which is equal to what is being given in the market. Appreciation, very important. Try to organize some team events outside of work hours. When people get to know each other outside of work, everything changes. Really, having a couple drinks after work with your colleagues, that you've only been talking about technical stuff with, and now you can hear about their kids or their dog or their train set or whatever they have at home. To know them in a different way, and that's also very important. Try to be more than just colleagues. It's more than just work. Also, try to make clear why we're doing the work.
And why is it that
mission
you're
statement.
doing?
If you're a managed security provider, hopefully you have an interesting set of customers. And that's something you can explain to your analysts. Maybe they don't realize it because they're just looking at the technical side of things. But what are you actually protecting? Maybe you're protecting an electricity company or a water company or something else, a hospital in COVID time. You're really contributing to society then. So explain it to them, make it clear to them.
Yeah.
What is their contribution doing more than just getting rid of the alert in the channel?
Yeah.
I think those are the things that pop into my mind immediately. I might get back to you on this with some more.
that is fine. They're all very valuable. In the meantime, something did trigger me. You mentioned a couple of times that it's also important for them to know, for example, what kind of roadmap, track, or however you want to call it, they have in front of them. What do you think about education for analysts, education for SOC employees, for blue teamers? Is there something that you would think absolutely necessary for them to know? And that can be either very technical, or that can be more towards the soft skills, or more towards the anything that is not technical related.
I think network and operating system knowledge is the most important. You don't need to be schooled specifically in security in order to start on a security operations center in a tier 1 position. If you have solid network knowledge, maybe you know how to work with a PCAP file, or at least you can tell the difference between an HTTP request and a telnet connection or whatever, and you can recognize port numbers quickly, these kind of things. Yeah, good solid network knowledge. In case you're also doing EDR, endpoint detection, you also need solid operating system knowledge of all the operating systems that you're protecting. And security is not really that complicated. The security challenges haven't changed in decades. They're all still the same. You know, use a strong password, don't reuse your passwords. We could go on. You all know these issues we're struggling with. They don't change a lot. So it's very easy to teach people that part. Good operating system knowledge is harder to come by than network knowledge. More people have quite a good grasp on TCP/IP and everything, but an in-depth knowledge of Windows or Linux is harder to find. And those people actually, they quickly move into more engineering kind of positions or higher tiers. So those are the things that I look for when we're hiring people. They need to be smart and motivated.
Also very important, absolutely.
Yeah, and as long as they're motivated and they have the capacity to learn it all, we even are willing to take people with completely different backgrounds and just chuck them full of trainings and get them up to speed. I had people who came from so diverse backgrounds. A couple of people, really good ones, came from criminology backgrounds. But I have people who came from art school, or they did animal sciences. Very diverse, but highly intelligent.
Very diverse.
Yeah, very diverse, but they're very smart and they're super motivated, and they also have they feel very responsible for the work they're performing. So that's also important, you know.
I guess that's also like a main part of the job, right? That you need to have some sense of responsibility, because you're basically responsible for being able to detect whether or not something is happening, either for your own organization or for your client.
And the right ethical standards.
Exactly.
Yeah, so mindset from what you're saying sounds really, really important, right? So these sort of attributes of being able to learn, wanting to learn, growth mindset, a sense of personal responsibility, accountability, they're harder to measure, actually, because we were talking about this before, right? You know, kind of getting into security. And I found a thing on LinkedIn, and it was sort of like the pyramid of you know, the things that you look for in a candidate, not specifically about security. And the kind of the foundational ones were related to character, related to things that you can't really teach, right? You either have a certain type of character or you don't. But one of the things that I think is a barrier to people maybe getting into security is that as humans, we don't like ambiguity. And ambiguity is kind of like risk. So it's easy to measure certifications. It's easy to measure, you know, it's probably pretty easy to measure whether somebody knows their stuff on networks and on operating systems. You can test that pretty easily. It's not as, I was about to say, it's not as easy. It's way harder to test somebody's character if you've only got like 30 or 45 minutes with them. And yet, if we've got like massive skills gap and we have people out there who have potential, but we're not managing to, except in some rare cases, kind of bring them in because we haven't found some way of scaling how we identify those transferable skills, right? We can teach skills, right? But you can't, like you say, could you tell us a little bit more actually, when you've brought in people who come, for example, criminologists or people who have an arts background, what is their onboarding different, or their time to kind of, I hate this term, but it's a real consulting term, time to performance. Like, no, but it's when a person starts feeling, well, I don't need my hand held anymore. I like autonomously make a decision and be confident in it. Is there a difference in how you, like as a manager, how you have to accompany them, or the process, I guess, of allowing them, helping them be successful?
Yeah, sure. I think what you need is an apprenticeship for the people with a different background. A set curriculum, take in a whole group, start at the same time, give them all the same education. That gives you some scaling options. You know, you can scale that larger. And others who come with a technical background, they maybe don't need to go through the apprenticeship. Of course, they can get straight in. But if you have that apprenticeship as an option, it opens up the market for you. You can hire completely different people. And like you said, a lot of skills can be learned. You can teach somebody about TCP/IP, but you can't teach them to behave ethically. Or you could try, but they're probably going to cheat you in the end, you know? You can't give somebody more brain capacity. So get the smart, motivated people in, get those in, and get them into an apprenticeship, and keep tuning that as well, the apprenticeship. So once several people have gone through it, ask them, were you able to get to work immediately? Were there skills you were missing? Try to fill those gaps, tune it a little bit, optimize it. Eventually you'll have a working program that can work like a constant machine, pumping out new analysts.
Small question then, though, because you mentioned the apprenticeship. Of course, you have several ways then to keep the person that is learning motivated, but how do you keep the mentor motivated to keep on learning the mentee?
I think so. The apprenticeship program is it's partial self-study. It's some instructor-led classes, some online classes in COVID time, of course. The people who run an online class or something, these are teachers who chose that as a profession. They're fine doing it. They enjoy their work. And then you have to have something like a buddy system. You know, people start their work. They're going to need close cooperation with somebody who's already had the experience. This is not something you can do forever unless you really enjoy that. So for those people, the same thing applies. Make sure you plot the course for them. Talk about their ambitions and their motivations, and see where their strengths lie, and try to put them in a position where they can perform best. So once you have this system of new people coming in, say once every year in tier 1, from there everybody moves into different positions, and then slowly the puzzle will start forming itself, and you have a closed system of fresh people coming in the bottom and moving up through the ladder, basically.
And the continuously developing security operations center.
Yeah.
So I got a question for the newbies who would like to join, a SOC. What would your advice be to them?
Newbies in a SOC. So
you've already mentioned about trying to get up to speed with operation system knowledge, but what else would you advise them, people who want to actually get into a SOC?
You can learn a little bit about the mind of an attacker if you start playing around with some offensive exercises.
Mm-hmm.
Plenty of training sites for this, like Hack the Box or similar websites. Give that a shot. They usually have different levels. You can start with the easy ones first, or not even actually hacking a box, but they will have decryption challenges and other cybersecurity related challenges. Doing those, you will realize what an attacker is actually doing when he's attacking your customer. I think that's that's way on the other end of the spectrum. But I think that's exactly what you need. If you're only sitting on that side of the screen, you're only looking at the alert. It's very hard to get the in-depth understanding. And what is important, when an alert triggers, you want that the analyst not just looks at the content of the alert, but tries to imagine the whole picture. What is going on here? Is this part of a bigger chain?
Yeah.
What is the actual attack going on here? The IDS flags a packet that went out over port 53. Should be a DNS packet, but the content doesn't look like a DNS packet. Now the alert triggers. If you've never been on the attacker side, it's very hard to imagine like what part of the attack could this be. It's probably the data exfiltration going on. It's way at the end of the chain, so you need to look what happened before this.
Find the missing dots.
Yeah, so building the whole picture of the entire attack gets easier if you have played around with attack tools yourself.
Yeah.
Correct.
But please do it in a safe environment.
Very important.
And I think also advice would be to probably build your own home lab. If you're not doing capture the flags, you can just set up your own environment and try and see what's happening in your home network. To understand,
which can be done very low cost these days. A couple of Raspberry Pis, you can build a couple of machines already. Very easy to get started with that. Don't let the cost be a blocking issue. It's no longer a necessity. In the past, when I was going through the ladders, it was an expensive hobby, really, only for the real fanatics. Every couple of years, you had to shell out a couple thousand in order to get a new system that could cope with the new software.
Yeah.
And that was just your one system. If you wanted to build a lab, I don't know where you would get the money.
Yep. Thankfully, those times have changed.
Yes, now it's very easy. And if you don't have the space at home for a Raspberry Pi, you can get something in the cloud.
Exactly.
And and the people who are already in the SOC, what is their future? As in, what professions can they move to? Not tier 1, tier 2, because that's still a SOC analyst. Like what are the possibilities for them?
You're going to look at Jennifer. She became a consultant. There are, of course, different kinds of consultants, SOC consultants, or maybe more on the business side, the business consultants. Usually, when I have an interview with a new employee, I can already have a feeling of where they will end up in the organization. Some people just look like a business consultant, and the way they speak,
Jennifer?
the way they dress. But others move into sales, or usually more on the pre-sale side. Just being the technical guy, joining in on the sales initiatives. Different types of consultancy. You can go to the offensive team. You become a red teamer. Maybe you want to become an information security officer. All of these are possible. You can also, we're not only providing SOC services, but also managed firewalls, etc. So maybe during your career, you find out that is your thing. You like thinking about a rule base and optimizing it, and playing around with filters and things. So that's also a possibility. You become a technical consultant, or implementer, or whatever. Basically, go in every direction you want to. Me, I eventually became a team leader. Started out as an analyst.
Yeah.
Just make it your goal. Put that goal in your head. You get there.
So also looking at the time, because we're almost at the end of our scheduled time, if I can summarize, the SOC is a very good starting point for your cybersecurity career. If you have analyst experience, you basically can go wherever you want. And it's not just about the technical skills, but it's also about the mindset.
Very much so, yeah.
Fair enough.
Great.
That being said, is there anything else we would like to add before closing down again?
I just want to say, Alan, thanks for joining us. So to have you as a guest. Thanks for being so kind of frank and honest about what your job is. Yeah, it was just enlightening. Really good.
I enjoyed it very much. Thank you very much for the invite.
Happy to hear that.
Maybe there'll be a future episode where you can use my input.
Hope so.
Absolutely. You're more than welcome to return.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, then for the closing remarks, thank you, Allan, for joining us. For our viewers, thank you so much for the support, and please like and subscribe. And for now,
Ciao.
have a fun remainder of the day.
Bye-bye.
Ciao, ciao.